Okay, can everyone hear me and see that slide?
Yep.
Great. Thanks very much for letting me talk today. Time and time zones is kind of a big topic. So what I've tried to do is to reduce it down to a size where I can give you the least amount of information possible, but to still be useful. And we'll see how that goes. So we're going to cover three little things here. We're going to look at what a time zone is, how to display an event's time, and how to do time calculations that will make sense to your users. So what is a time zone? We're going to try and come up with a useful definition, something that we can use to answer the two questions that we will answer after this. So I've done the cliche thing and looked at Wikipedia, and it has a pretty good definition. It's a region of the globe that observes a standard time for legal, commercial, and social purposes. So this is admitting that it's kind of a made-up thing, like it's not an exact science. And but for our purposes, this is not quite specific enough. Thankfully, most software relies on a single database of time zone information, and they give their own definition. There's this thing called the TimeZone database. It's known as kind of TZ or Zone Info. And this is a more useful definition of what a time zone can be. The main thing that a time zone does is it represents the history of local time for a representative location. So it's going to show, it's going to give us the history of what this group of people agree on as being their local time. And it's implying that it's also giving us in the future as well what this group of people or this region agrees should be their local time. So the time zone database has 388 entries, and they look a bit like this. These are the names of the time zones. So America, New York, Australia, Sydney, etc., etc. And these are really good, but they're not quite as user-friendly as they could be. I guess I should also say that when you say the time zone Europe London, what you're saying is that you're saying that the rules that govern how time is displayed at that location now and in the past and in the future. So these names are good, but they're not as end user friendly. So Rails gives us its own mapping to a meaningful subset of 134 zones, as it says in the documentation. So here we can simply say Sydney or London or Eastern Time, bracket US and Canada, and that will give us a key into the time zone database. So the short answer to the question, what is a time zone, is just the string Sydney. So for our purposes, that's pretty good. We can say we can use that as a shorthand to say this is what the time is in Sydney, and this is how it will change into the future and into the past. Okay, so let's now look at how to display an event's time. We're going to go through a list of instructions, and then we'll look at a couple of examples. So the basic premise of how to show an event's time in your application is, first of all, get a time object. Second of all, set the time zone of that object to the time zone relevant to the user. And third step, write the time to the page. So I'll go through two examples. And then we'll look at some hypothetical code. So the first example is an in-person event. That might be buying a ticket to the movies, or like a flight taking off, or a departure time, or perhaps a meetup in 2019. So here's some code. We've got an event model with a starts at time and a time zone attribute, which is just simply a string. In our example, we have an event that starts at this particular time. This is what, when we loaded the event from the database, this is what it gives us as the start time. I've also set the time zone to be Sydney. And then the magic line. So event.startsAt in time zone, event.timezone. So what we're doing is that we're feeding the event's time zone into the time object, so that when we display the event on the page, it will be relevant. So in this particular case, it's not very relevant to show that this event starts at 7 a.m. UTC. It's much more relevant to show that the event is starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So this makes sense for an event where we're going to attend in person. So let's look at the second example, which is an online or televised event. Think about a sporting event you're going to watch on TV. A server log entry is something where the event that's taking place is kind of on a computer, like it's in AWS somewhere. It doesn't really matter where on the globe that event is taking place, but you want to see it. You want to see it relative to where you're sitting, and of course, a meetup in 2020. So using the event model that we had before, we're going to add another model called user, and we've given this user an attribute called time zone. So this is relatively common in web applications where you have users, where you either let them pick a time zone from the list of 134 Rails approved time zones, or you might detect it or guess. So we have the starts at date, where we're displaying that we've got the event start time here. In this case, the user's time zone is Perth. I don't know if there's anyone here from Perth today, unfortunately not. And here's our line again. So event.startsAt in time zone, user.timezone. So the key here is that we're feeding in this case, the user's time zone into that time, so that when we display it, we show the time that's relevant to that user. Most of the complication in working with time is determining from whose perspective you should be displaying the information. So is it relevant that the event is taking place in a particular location, like a flight departure, or is it more relevant to show it in the current user's time? and it can often not be clear. So if you think about perhaps a blog post, is it more important to show that it was midnight in the author's location when it was posted, or that it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I'm reading it, that I know that that's when it was published? It can be slightly ambiguous. So the next part, just going to check the chat. Yep, great. So the next part is how to do calculations that make sense. Yeah, so we'll walk through an example here. So we'll go through the instructions again. So very similar. In this case, get a time object. Second of all, set the time zone of that object to the time zone relevant to the user. And the final step is use the best duration when making the calculation. So I'll walk through I'll take the event that we had, and I'm going to pretend that we do this meetup weekly, and that the event is meant to happen at 6 p.m. Sydney time every week. So here is the event and the event's time zone, and here we're using in time zone again to set it to Sydney time. So we've got today starting at 6 p.m. And then the calculation is, next starts at equals starts at plus 1 week. So 1.week will return a duration object, and it means the logical value of 1 week. It doesn't mean the number of seconds in a week. It means logically, it means 1 week. I don't know how else to describe it. So if we keep adding a week to this day, we're going to hit, everything's going to be fine until we get to the 30th of March. And then when we add a week, we're going to reach a daylight savings boundary. And what we want to happen is that our definition was that this event happens every week at 6 p.m. Sydney time. And so by using in time zone with Sydney, and by using 1.week, this will give us the right answer. It will give us that it's 6 p.m. In the 6th of April. If we don't do that, if we instead use hours, for example, if instead we add 7 times 24 hours, which you would think would be the same thing, we'll get the wrong result. When we get to April, if we add this number of hours, we'll get 5 p.m. in the evening instead of 6 p.m. So what this is highlighting is that math with time doesn't work how you think it should work. And by using the TZinfo database and the proper duration, we can get the correct result. We can get the result that the user expects, not that the computer expects. So if you use set time zone and with the relevant time zone, you could ignore all these things. You can kind of ignore daylight savings. You could ignore leap seconds. You could ignore the Chatham Islands. You can ignore leap years. You can ignore February, which is a great thing to ignore. And so a whole series of bugs that could be in your application disappear. So thanks very much. That's all I really want to say about time zones. I'll be happy to take any questions. Did that make any sense at all?
So the duration stuff, the smarts in that, I take it that comes from active support?
Yes, that's right. One thing I meant to say at the start was that this is in the context of Rails, and in particular that active support, that part of active support that does this.
Yep. Awesome. Awesome, Lang. Any questions?